Good afternoon, and welcome to the Bishkek Express, a podcast where in each episode we discuss hot topics in Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, and beyond. I'm your host, Austin Reach, a research assistant from Evidence Central Asia. Our guest today is Dr. Michaela Pixová. Dr. Pixová is a researcher at the University of Natural Resources and Life Science Vienna and Prague's very own Charles University. Our guest is also a lecturer at the Academy of Arts, Architecture, and Design in Prague, as well as the University of Newark in Prague. And just as a side note, I first came in contact with Dr. Pixová in her course called Environmental Crisis and Global Sustainability. And also, a bigger side note, just to flex, I got a final grade of 99.7%, so that's a rather gangster feat of mine. In addition, our guest also writes for A2 Alarm, Aktualne.cz, and Klimatická koalice. Do you mind explaining what those are? I read this from a combination of your LinkedIn, your Twitter, and there's a couple other websites that talked about what your projects did, and I don't know if I'm saying something that isn't true, so...
Okay, so if you want me to start with my publishing activities, then I don't really write from Klimatická koalice, which is the climate coalition website. But I used to, because I was the coordinator of the Czech Climate Coalition for 2 years. And Aktuálne, it sounds really serious when you say that I write for Aktuálne, but I just have a blog on aktualne.cz. But in fact, I haven't been posting anything lately because actually, like last week, I had this post on my Facebook that I find it increasingly more discouraging to write anything on my blog because it seems like it's really hard to communicate the complex things that are happening around us, you know, the crises and the solutions, and people just don't seem to want to understand these topics. And but I still write for A2 Alarm, and actually, like this summer, I wrote 2 articles for A2 magazine. So yeah, I sometimes also write for A2 magazine.
Okay. I was going to ask this later on in our interview, but it seems your social media presence is oftentimes, it's subject to agitation and maybe some controversy, even though that sounds bad. But you're very active with your activism on Twitter and Facebook as well, I suppose?
Yeah, actually, like right now, I think it's mostly on Twitter because it's easier to reach people who should actually read this information as opposed to writing or anything on Facebook where you're preaching to the same crowd and who are your friends and or like, what do you call it? Preaching to the choir, yeah. So, but it's also very, I don't know, it's frustrating. So it's a very toxic environment. So sometimes I have periods of time where I try to avoid it. And sometimes I have periods of time when I try to be active. And if you're asking why, then I guess it's because I see myself mostly as an activist scholar, and I think that science doesn't really matter if you don't try to also communicate it to the public, and also if you don't really actually try to make a change. But maybe communication is not really enough. Maybe I should be doing something more real with my hands, you know, like, I don't know, digging in the ground, creating some alternative space for the apocalypse that's coming. But yeah, I'm still at this stage where I'm trying to warn the people and suggest some solutions, but yeah, I don't know how effective that is.
So you're a so-called scholar activist, but do you also see yourself participating in demonstrations or taking to the street with your activism?
Oh yeah, I've done a lot of that too. Yeah, I don't know whether there's a difference between scholar academics or scholar activists or activist scholars. Does it really matter, language-wise?
I'm not even sure.
Yeah, so I do a lot of research of socio-ecological transformation and of social movements. So I think that you can't really focus on these topics without also trying to do some, you know, practical stuff and make your voice heard in the arena.
Well, let's get back into the lighthearted introductory things before we dive into the heart of today's podcast. Just as a very simple question, how's your day going?
Yeah, I don't know. It's very hot, so I have been a little bit frustrated by that because it's not very normal for September 18th to have such to have 29 degrees of Celsius. That's a lot. I think that we're breaking some new records today again, and it's been like that for quite some time now. So this definitely doesn't feel like a normal beginning of autumn. Yeah, but it's been a normal work day. A little bit different because my younger son has left for an adaptation trip with his school. He's in the first year, so I feel like a little bit there's some less burden on me in terms of taking care of the family. So
interesting. Let's keep talking about you specifically. I think when you look at someone's social media profile, sorry to go back to it once again, you could tell a lot about that person. And your Twitter cover photo is quite interesting because there's a quote. And I'd like you to tell me why this quote is so important you would choose it to be the face of your Twitter. And it goes, "Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. David Attenborough." What does that mean to you?
Well, it means exactly what it says. I think that the society or humans have already breached the planetary boundaries. Now, just recently, there was a report from the scientists that said that we have now breached the 6th planetary boundary, and all the ones that have already been breached continue to be more and more breached than before. And but our politicians still believe in infinite economic growth, and we have never found any, there's been a lot of research done that tries to see if it's actually possible to decouple economic growth from ecological footprint and from material use, and it hasn't been. So far, nothing like that has been discovered. It doesn't work. Even European Union lies out of its pocket when its politicians say, or the representatives of the EU say, that we are the first state, or not state, the first
country?
No, yeah, I wouldn't call European Union a country, but state formation that has managed to decouple its economic growth from the growth of emissions of carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gas emissions. But it's not true because it doesn't tell you the fact that we have outsourced all of our, or not all of our, but a lot of our production into developing countries, into the countries of the global south. We also export a lot of our waste to these countries to dispose of. And that way we get our nice environment, clean environment, more or less. We don't pollute our forests, and it's even more true for the countries of Western Europe than for the countries of the so-called post-socialist countries, and we get to still consume the same or even more, because the people in the east or in the south are going to make it for us for a much cheaper, and without considering environmental externalities as much, because the law doesn't protect human rights and the environment as much in these countries. So I think that it's actually another example of how colonialism actually continues. We're still living in this is a form of a new neocolonialism. Yeah. We're still exploiting these countries for our own profit. And then it gives us a sense of some sort of like moral superiority, because we're like, hey, look how clean we are and how dirty you are. And actually you even blame these countries for being the ones who are polluting the world, who are causing climate change, who are causing biodiversity loss, all of that. But we don't see that the true cause is actually us.
You said a couple things that I would like to go back to in the beginning of your response. So I think I looked on your Twitter recently and I noticed you made a recent post that the next planetary boundary has been breached. So what is the sixth boundary that has been breached?
I think it's fresh water, the quality of fresh water, yeah. And one of the main reasons why the quality of fresh water is diminishing is because of the unsustainable agriculture, or like the practices of the global agro-industry or agro-food industry, and because it uses a lot of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and it goes into water, and then it diminishes the quality of water, both underground and surface water. Mm-hmm. So I think that was like one of the main things that the scientists were alarmed about when they were communicating the sixth planetary boundary being breached. That it's not just this; it's also like the level of deforestation, the loss of habitat. Yeah.
We learned in class that nitrogen was detrimental to the soil, and nitrogen would also get into the water supply as well. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting, but quite alarming. Again, about you. What led to your interest in the study of the environment, climate change, and so forth?
So, actually, it's interesting that I haven't been interested in climate change and the environmental crisis for all that long. I was initially interested in urban development and urban social movements. And this interest actually came out of my own emotional breakdown when in 2018 I started to feel like really immense environmental grief. And I was thinking, what can I do about this? And there's a lot of environmental science included in geography already, but I just wasn't doing any research in that area before. Although some people would say, okay, urban social movements are actually also environmental movements, but it's not really quite true. That it's different. Yeah? Like you can distinguish between those that are like genuinely interested in the environment and those who just like care about the places where they live or like the services that they're getting and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I just I started to be more interested in the environmental aspect of it and not so much the urban justice aspect because it's just cities are just one small aspect of the whole bigger thing of the environment, you know. Cities produce 75% or maybe even 80% of all of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, I became interested in being more active in the movements as well. So that's actually how I solved my environmental grief. That I started to organize people at that time, and I was trying to kind of put some of the theories into practice. You know, create some wider coalitions between different movements and different public sectors. It didn't quite work as well as I imagined. I think that like maybe my expectations were too high, and around the same time, I also started to teach this course at UNIP about the environmental crisis.
You were one of the first people to put me on to the term environmental anxiety, climate anxiety, and I'm curious if was there a particular catastrophic event that brought on your environmental grief, or was it just a slow procession of something?
I think I first started to feel some environmental anxiety in 2015 when I went on my environmentally unfriendly trip to Canada because my husband is Canadian, so we sometimes have to take environmentally very destructive flights. And in 2015, we were there for Christmas, and it was very warm, and it just didn't seem right for Canada. I was like, wow, I'm actually like sweating a few days before Christmas. And So that was maybe one of the first moments where I felt like really concerned. But then the real catharsis, I would say, came in 2018, because 2018 was probably the hottest and driest year in the Czech Republic. And, Czech Republic has always had quite a lot of rain, and we had gray, rainy summers, and suddenly there was a time when it didn't rain for like 6 months almost. There was some little rain every once in a while, but it killed a lot of trees. I was devastated, even feeling for the trees, what are these trees going to, how are they going to live without water? It's terrible. It's it's an ecocide. This is a true ecocide. The human lives were saved because, we have all the technologies and stuff like that. But what about the non-human lives? And what is going to happen to us without the non-human lives? We're completely dependent on them. And my kids were pretty small at the time. They're still small now, but they were even smaller in 2018. And I was just obsessed with thinking about what their future is going to be like, and how they're not going to have anything to drink or eat, or there's going to be some big social unrest if there's not enough resources for people, and people are just going to forget about humanity and start fighting for whatever is left.
If I remember correctly, I think you said teachings from Buddhism kind of helped you think about life as a cycle, and is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. Or not just a cycle. Life is a cycle, but it's also constantly changing, and we can't dwell on things. So it's hard to let go, especially when it comes to, your children, for example. But I did let go of a lot of things, I feel a little bit alienated from the people who are still not letting go. Some people are still imagining that the life we live now is going to keep going the way it is, that it's just not going to change, or if anything, it's going to get better. I think that people are now much more concerned than they used to be, but I think that they still haven't fully internalized it, what that means, what change it's going to bring, and what change we as a society need to undergo. So sure. I find it a little bit weird, discussing, for example, with parents in my son's class, where we have silly fights. For example, they ask for more homework for children, and I'm like, homework of the same stuff that they're absolutely do not need for the future that's coming, and that none of you knows anything about. I think they should be learning how to grow food, how to filter water, how to make a shelter, or how to cooperate, how to, work with their own emotions. That's what they need to learn. Not how to, all that stuff that we used to learn already in Czechoslovakia when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. They're still learning the same stuff, maybe sometimes in a more fun way, but...
I can't help but think you might have imparted some of what you believe to your children as far as respecting nature and maybe what the future might look like, or...
I'm not so sure about it. They sometimes say that sometimes the children, they rebel against their parents, and I think that might happen to me as well. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. We'll see. But unfortunately, what we're currently fighting with is YouTube. And YouTube is showing him nothing but consumerism, hedonism, stupid products, destructive fun, they take 1,000 liters of different soft drinks and they put them all in a bucket and put some Mentos in and soda, and then they turn it into some massive colorful eruption. And I'm like, what are they going to do with all that foam? And the kids, of course, are like, yeah, Fanta, Mirinda, Sprite, Coca-Cola. And they know all the brands. And they want it. They think it's good.
Yeah, I think social media has become a capitalist hellscape. But
yeah. Even worse is that, these YouTubers like Mr. Beast, who always drives Lamborghinis and I don't know what else. I think he also drives Teslas, which I guess is not so bad, but still, like electric cars is like a whole other problem.
Mm. Could you lead us through your career in academia? So you started within geography, correct? And now you have a PhD in something else environmental related, correct?
No, I have a PhD in human geography and regional development.
Mm.
So yeah, I didn't study. Actually, like in the past, I also studied biology.
Okay.
Teaching of biology and geography for high schools, like high school level. And after that, I did the PhD.
Okay. Are you a Prague native?
No.
Where are you from in the Czech Republic?
I'm from Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm. I went there on Flixbus one time.
Okay.
And within this field of study you have, are there any heroes or heroines, just scholars you look up to that maybe have influenced your direction in research, or just you look to them for inspiration with their scholarly articles, something of that sort?
In my current research or in general?
In general, someone who might have like steered your trajectory with your academia.
Oh, I have definitely been the most influenced by David Harvey, Professor David Harvey, who was a geographer. And I think it was a really life-breaking event or life-changing event. It was a life-changing event when I met him in 2009 at an event in New York. That showed me a direction for my future PhD thesis, and it showed me like what was the most important about David Harvey's work was the ability to analyze space critically and through the prism of like the critical feminist and post-colonial prism. That actually came a little bit later, but also like the anti-capitalist perspective. That was definitely what I got from Harvey. And it was not anything, it wasn't normal here. Like I was already an anti-capitalist at that time because of the anarchist circles that I was part of or mingling with. But with Harvey, I actually found out that I can apply it in science, which no one would ever teach you in this country. Or maybe they would now, but not definitely not at the geography department. Although I shouldn't be like, that's not entirely true. There are a few people who actually did support me in this path, and who also showed me that this was a possibility. So I shouldn't be completely unjust or yeah. So.
And does your husband share the same sentiments as you?
Yeah, he does.
Is he in the same field of research? Or?
He's not a researcher. No.
Okay. Do you have any current projects you'd like to share?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on 2 projects, which might sound like they're very different, but they're actually very closely related. So the first one, or at least in the beginning, I thought that they were different, and now I know that they're very closely related. One is the project that I'm working on in Vienna at Boku, and it's a project exploring food alternatives, which means not like some tofu or like some plant-based alternatives to meat, for example, but it's value-based modes of production and consumption of food, which are an alternative to the corporate production and consumption, which we also call or conceptualize as the corporate food regime. And so we're looking at the different food initiatives, mostly, which are trying to change the food system. But in the Czech Republic, and not only in the Czech Republic, also in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and also in like other semi-peripheral and peripheral economies, do not really have all that many food initiatives or food movements, but they have a lot of practices which are already sustainable, but we still see them as something like outdated, something that belongs to the past, something that will eventually be replaced by the normal way of eating and producing, which means going to the supermarket. And so I think that like our project is also looking a lot at like food self-provisioning and small-scale farming, like smallholders. And so this is the project in Vienna. And then the other project is called Sustain Action, and we're looking at, and that has only just started this spring, but it's a 5-year, up to 6-year long project. So there's going to be still a lot work and hopefully a lot of interesting outcomes. That is focusing on sustaining civic action in the context of multiple crises. And we're doing this in 6 countries. So I have 5 colleagues, and each one of us is from a different country. We're all women. One is me. Our project leader is from Sweden, and then there is another one from Poland, from Hungary, Serbia, and Romania.
I'm really glad you get the Eastern European perspective as well.
Oh, the Eastern European perspective is the main one, actually. And what we're actually trying to see is if there are some similarities with Sweden, because Sweden is often referred to as this country where socialism still survives, or yes, it has a lot of like socialist aspects. But it's not really true anymore because of it's also becoming neoliberalized. And so we want to see what are some of the similarities between these countries, and it's these are countries that haven't been conventionally like really compared, because in a hegemonic world, or in a world of hegemonic science production, these countries are, well, except for Sweden, are not normally part of the hegemonic center of knowledge production. So, and a lot of research that has been done is talking about these countries from the perspective of someone who is actually not from these countries. So we're trying to change that.
It seems like the work of Professor Jehlička, if I remember properly, I think that's part of his work, is he stated that the perspective of the East is simply like, it's not part of the conversation. It's totally negated because the West is like the centerfold of everything. It's very Western-centric. But within, it could be this project you just mentioned, or perhaps something in the past. Are there any projects that have been particularly rewarding or memorable for you? Something that actually came out of it you're proud of, or something like that?
Oh, you mean like a project that I was working on before these 2 projects?
Yeah, it could be these or something along the way in your academic journey.
Well, I'm happy to be working on these projects right now, but I don't have that many publications yet, because one project only started this year and the other one last year, or I joined the team in February last year, and it takes really long time to produce anything in academia. So first you have to do the research, and you have to write it, then you have to wait for the reviews, and then you have to change it after reviews. It's all takes a lot of time. So I don't have any like outcomes yet, which I could present and be like, okay, this is what I'm super proud of. I'm just right now proud of being able to work on these projects. And I would love to say that I am proud of my book that I wrote, that I finished in 2019, and it was published in 2020. Which was the outcome of my postdoctoral research that I did at Charles University at the Faculty of Social Science as part of my postdoc. And it was focusing on citizen participation in the restructuring of post-socialist cities. But the book has a lot of problems, so not really so much like content-wise, but the process of publishing was a little bit problematic because, like, first of all, one of the worst things that happened was that, and here we could talk about like struggling of being a young academic and being a woman, because basically in my last year of the postdoc, usually projects are only for 3 years, but it takes a long time until something like a book gets published, or until it's first you have to do the research, then you write the book, then it takes some time for it to get published. So what happened is that in my last year of my postdoc, my younger child got seriously sick, and I had to, focus my attention on him. And I had to postpone writing that book. And I had to write the book the year after, when my project was already finished. And I had that small child at home, but I was like, I have to finish this. So that was already a really difficult process of writing that book. And then some mistakes happened in the editing process. So then I was so upset about the whole process that I wasn't even like advertising my book anywhere, even though it's totally cool that I have a monography. But yeah, so I wish I could be more proud of it.
May I ask what post-socialist cities were involved in the book?
It was post-socialist cities in the Czech Republic.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Well,
I can't remember exactly what was the title of the project, but there were Prague, Prostějov, Jablonec, and České Budějovice.
Hometown.
Yeah.
Well, when you're not researching, when you're not participating in activism, what else can we find you doing as a harmless interest?
Gardening, growing vegetables, swimming, cooking a lot, and walking in nature, hiking. I don't know. Also cross-country skiing. But I'm like, I really like also winter sports, even though like they're not very environmentally friendly, like especially skiing and snowboarding. But I really like it. But I'm like trying to, get used to the idea that in the future we're not going to be able to do these sports at all. So, yeah.
Harsh reality, but it's conflicting.
Yeah, in the same way it's conflicting that I like to travel, and I've been trying to limit my travels a lot in the past few years. So in the past I used to go all over the place, and I don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Last question before we dive into the heart of the podcast. Do you think about my sushi presentation from time to time?
Yeah, all the time. I think that was a really life-changing presentation for a lot of the students, although I'm not sure how many of them are still thinking, oh my God, sushi is the most unsustainable food. I shouldn't eat it so much, because everybody loves sushi so much. Mm-hmm. Even my son loves it. It's my son's favorite food, my older son. He eats mostly vegetarian sushi, but I think about it actually every time. He eats sushi.
I guilt tripped you, unfortunately. All right.
But I think that a lot of the students, like, it was very memorable for all of the students. So that was a really good job.
Well, thanks. And I think it was that week. It was your anniversary, and you're supposed to go out with your husband to a special sushi place in town. So
you remember that?
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
I think I thought about it during the dinner as well.
Let's talk about sushi. We're going to move forward with one of our first segments, and one thing I want to precursor is that at the Bishkek Express podcast, we're primarily about Central Asia, so Kyrgyzstan and furthermore, but the beyond part, which I say in the intro, would include the post-socialist space and the post-Soviet space. So luckily today we could have a Central and Eastern European perspective. So whenever we were first emailing, when I invited you to the podcast, we were just, spitballing something to talk about. And you mentioned one of your interests was the Global East, but I want to be careful because you were very forthcoming about how the Global East is not a term you coined, it's not the crux of your research, but it's just something that you're becoming more interested in. So if you're willing, I would just like to keep the interest dimension of the Global East as a talking point. Would you feel comfortable with this?
No, I think that one of the reasons why I mentioned Global East is mostly because the podcast is supposed to be about something that is relevant for Kyrgyzstan. And technically, Kyrgyzstan would fall into the Global East paradigm. So, but yeah, so I didn't come up with this term, but I think it's a definitely an applicable term, because when we're talking about, for example, post-colonialism and like efforts to somehow fix the inequalities and injustices and the damages that have happened to the global South because of being exploited by the global North, somehow the countries, the semi-periphery of the post-socialist and the post-Soviet countries somehow are ignored in that debate. And we have a tendency to just, not really see them as the real part of the global North, because they're not as affluent and they're not as developed. But also we don't see them as like this real examples of, they're not former colonies, although you would be hard-pressed to not say that about the former colonies of Russia, right? So, and I think it's important because it really affects how we think about this region and how we do research in this region, and also in terms of the development paths that we're expecting this region to take. Yeah, because the region is not like taken entirely seriously, and because it's like seen still like halfway on its way to become as capitalist and developed as the West. But it's also not seen as struggling as much as some of the countries, for example, in Africa or in some of the South Asian countries. And I think that especially from the perspective of knowledge production, has been often mentioned that there is a tendency to kind of like orientalize and provincialize this region and think of it as this region that just doesn't have its own character. It has like some character that is lost and it's gone, and now it needs to adopt the character that the Western democracies are going to impose on it. And that kind of a paradigm is the main driving force. It has colonized people's minds. Like I can't remember the name of the person who said it, but I have read that the region has been basically epistemologically decapitized. Like it wasn't allowed to formulate its own history or its own knowledge or its own character. It was just expected to just, end something that belongs to the past and now embark on what has been presented to it as a ready-made path, And in that regard, that region is always lagging behind. But I think that then again, it's also very dangerous to think about it from this perspective as well, because when you try to think of some sort of epistemological emancipation of the region, it can give a lot of drive to voices that you don't really want to be heard, like the racist, nationalist, far right voices that are refusing everything progressive, and they're like, okay, we're not like the West, we want to have our own way, we're not gonna decarbonize, we're not gonna have gay marriages, we're just gonna be true to our roots, whatever that is. And then again, it can also be used, how to say, so this is like one way how how some actors are trying to free themselves from this unidirectional path, but at the same time, the so-called progressive voices that see themselves as part of the West, as part of the region that somehow epitomizes the values that we want to identify with. Justice, fairness, democracy, liberty, you name it. Those same people, by doing that, by trying to distance themselves from these far-right people, what they're doing is that they're unknowingly maybe also accepting the whole package, including the neoliberal part, without realizing that the neoliberal part is actually only reinforcing the position of the global East or of these like post-socialist and post-Soviet countries in the semi-periphery. Because what the capitalists really want is to have a source of cheap labor and cheap resources maybe too, that they can exploit as part of this neocolonial project. That's why European Union is always so interested in expanding, like taking in new members. But then they don't really care about that the new member states have like paychecks that are 10 times smaller. Like how is it possible that in Bulgaria, which is part of EU, people get paid, I don't know, I'm not sure what the paycheck there is, but maybe it's 500 euros a month. And somewhere like Germany, it's 4,000 euros a month. No one cares about that because there are there are strong, powerful political, but mainly economic actors who want that to stay that way. Okay. And they need to expand the trade area, the free trade area, so that there's more place, more area to exploit and to colonize, to use for direct investment. Because, this is all part of the constant need of capitalism to grow. Capitalism cannot exist without constant growth, which, as I said already, is completely insane when you think of the fact that we have a finite planet. So this is one of the ways how you can make capitalism grow, by colonizing new places where that are still in need from certain perspectives. They're in need of new investment. And maybe, it would be great if richer countries invested in these countries, but in a fair way that actually helps local people, that really helps people to become equal with the rest of the world, but it also doesn't destroy the environment. And that's really hard, which is, So right now, what we're seeing is mostly development that happens. Yeah, sure, it helps certain people, but there's whole lot more that it doesn't help you at all. Like middle classes, some middle classes, they maybe their lives get better, especially if the development comes, or if they are in a productive age and they have the right jobs and the development comes and they get the right opportunities. Like for example, 90s were great in Czech Republic because you could totally exploit the situation for your own benefit. Even a person without very good education could become a billionaire at that time because there was nothing. So, but now a lot of the people managed to secure themselves at that time. A lot of people were helped by being able to, for example, privatize their socialist homes or post-socialist homes. But what about the people now? Now the situation has gotten out of hand. Now people can't afford housing anymore with their salaries. The people who managed to buy housing 10 years ago, they're okay. But the ones who need to buy housing now, no. They're much more threatened by becoming homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it's gonna, So this sort of development creates some elites and helps some people, and then it creates a lot of losers, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But the losers are the ones that don't have any voice. We don't listen to them. The middle class people, especially they're the ones who have voice, and they can talk about whatever. They can establish the public discourse, basically. And they're the ones who will say, okay, all of these people who are now demonstrating at the Wenceslav Square against the government, they're all stupid losers, and they're inferior because they want, they don't want to help Ukraine, they just care about themselves. But, I don't want to justify the demonstrations that are in favor of Putin, but at the same time, I think that it's completely wrong to dismiss the struggles of these people who can't pay they just can't get by on monthly basis or on daily basis. So, and they, out of desperation and out of lack of real good left-wing leaders, because the political left has been decimated in this country and in actually most of the other countries in the world. They just don't know what else to do other than join these, political entrepreneurs who are just trying to abuse the situation for their own profit, and who say stupid shit that makes sense to these people, but they don't have any better alternative. So,
as someone who has an unquenchable, probably unhealthy obsession with Eastern Europe and the post-Soviet space, the global East is a scarier concept just because, like you've discussed, there's capitalist undertones. It's disingenuous, and there's a backdoor for the elite to just rape and pillage whatever is there. And just for the sake of my understanding, would you consider the global East as encompassing Eastern Europe, but also Central Asia, and even, when you get into maybe the Asian part of Russia, even, what type of, is it the Eurasian continent per se? Maybe it's not your term, but
I don't know exactly what the term is still quite new, I think. So okay. It still needs some more work, but some more precision. But I would guess that it's the post-Soviet space.
And just to wrap up, one last question, because I'd like to get into the article you told me about. As we were emailing, there's some colorful language that was associated, and you've mentioned it a little bit already, but I would like you to connect these terms back to the discussion of capitalists in the post-Soviet, post-socialist East. You talked about colonization, exploitation, and then supranational capital. Unless you feel like you've adequately covered that within your last response, do you feel like you have more to say about connecting that back to our discussion about the post-socialist East or global East?
Well, I think I've touched these topics already. I don't know exactly how I should expand on it. So the first one is colonialism. So I think it's interesting. It's a very interesting term because most people probably think that we're definitely living in a post-colonial era because the Western empires do not have their colonies anymore. Even Russia has lost its colonies. But by colonialism, it's a system of exploiting of the more powerful actors, exploiting the less powerful actors, or the helpless actors, or like the inferior, not inferior, but yeah. So it's a situation of power imbalance or unequally distributed power that the more powerful actors can abuse for their benefit. And in the past, it was through imposing control over certain territories and exploiting these territories. Nowadays, it's not the states, the national states, that are controlling particular territories. Now it's corporations. It's the global actor, like business actors. Basically, it's the global trade where, because of the economies of scale, the most powerful actors, the biggest companies, they have the biggest power and the biggest, they have the biggest economic power, but that also gives them political power. And it allows them, especially through the policies of the big supranational and international organizations like World Trade Organization or International Monetary Fund or World Bank, that these countries that are making sure that we have free trade and that globalization makes trade easier on a global scale. So because of that, the hegemony, the biggest actors can swallow up the smaller ones, and they are completely destroying traditional ways of life in a lot of countries around the world, because this is just leading to, they're just trying to, I don't know, it sounds like some conspiracy theory when I say that way, they are trying to, they're not really trying, they're just doing it because the situation that we're living in is allowing that to happen, that the powerful economic actors, it's in their interest that people consume their products, and that they have the monopoly to provide those products. And if people are living independently of that, it is not good for them. Yeah. So if somebody in the so-called underdeveloped countries is able to survive by self-provisioning, it's just not helping global capital to grow. It's not helping the owners of the capital to grow, to get richer. And these people are not powerful enough to fight against it, which is also why they're in the global south, people are much more politically conscious than people in the global north, because they know what it's like to be exploited by the northerners. And they know how to organize. They know that as individual units, they're completely helpless. And they have to create big movements and alliances to struggle against it. So this is the new version of colonialism that we're facing today. And we have some versions of it in the Czech Republic too, but of course it's not comparable to what countries in Africa or in South America are experiencing. So that's colonialism, okay?
Yeah, I think we could stop there because you have adequately covered it. But thank you so much, because I think that is so interesting. I forget the gentleman's name. I think he was a professor, but the way he dismissed the idea of underdeveloped, it's not underdeveloped but overexploited, which I think you might agree with these underdeveloped countries.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great term to use. Yeah, we should start talking about these countries as overexploited.
Indeed. Well, for the last half of our segment, I'd like to talk about food alternatives. And before we begin, is the project called Food Alternatives, or how should I appropriately say the term?
You can just say Food Alternatives, because otherwise the full name is too long. Okay. This is the name that people can look up online if they want. They can go to foodalternatives.at, like Austria, and they can find out more.
Very well. Could you please tell us the philosophy and mission of Food Alternatives?
I'm not going to go into any details about the conceptual framework of value-based modes of production and consumption, but I would just say that the main idea is to just find ways how we can explore in a better way alternatives to the corporate food regime. Because right now we're living in a world where the global food system is controlled by or is dominated by corporations, be it the big food industry or the big agribusiness, the industrial agriculture. And that is really destructive, not only for the environment, but also for people. Because it is also very vulnerable, because now the whole world is interconnected. You can, in one day, eat, onion from New Zealand, beef from Argentina, avocado from Mexico, but then all of that can be wrapped in a packaging that came from Thailand, so that already the supply chain is very problematic. Mm. But also it is very problematic from the perspective of human health and what people actually consume and how they relate to food. And because Marx has come up with this really nice term, which is called the metabolic rift. The metabolic rift refers to people's alienation from the food that they eat, or from the production of the food that they eat. When you eat, you don't even know where it comes from, who made it, how was it, how did it get to you, and another problematic aspect is that the food is super cheap because, maybe for some people it's actually very expensive now. But the reason why it's expensive or why people can't afford food is because all of the other aspects of their lives are very expensive. Like, for example, why is housing so expensive? Why do people have to spend around 40 to 50% of their income, and sometimes even more, on housing? But the food that we eat, the cost does not include the negative externalities that come with it. Yeah. Also, not only that the global food system exploits natural resources and causes huge environmental destruction and contributes hugely to the breaching of these planetary boundaries, but it also is dependent on exploiting cheap labor. So you can see it even in Europe. Like if you go to some of the countries that would call themselves agricultural empires, or like France or Italy or the Netherlands, you would see a lot of people who work in agriculture are actually cheap laborers who come from either semi-periphery or periphery, which is again, the result of the uneven development. So the West gets to get all the profits. The East is so poor that they have to send, that the people think it's more advantageous for them to go work on a plantation in the West. Mm-hmm. And even though they have to work 12 hours a day or even more, and they're not paid very well, and they're super tired and not really treated very well. And this is happening in Europe, and you can imagine that it's happening at an even worse scale in some other countries. Another problem of the global food system is that it is actually taking land away from people. Like in some of the countries where the governments do not operate very well, corporations just can just come and buy land despite the fact that there are people living on it. Mm-hmm. And they take away their livelihoods. And they say, but we're going to make these amazing farms and factories, and you can work there. It's so much better for you. But then they just exploit these people. These people who were before independent, now they have to depend on cheap labor for these corporations. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of lot to be said about the global food system. And the food alternatives that we're looking at, they're trying to change that, or sometimes consciously, and sometimes they're just doing it differently. Yeah, so there are many examples of first you have like smallholders, people who work on family farms, and they care about their land and they don't want to destroy it. They want to keep it for future generations. Then you have alternative economic models, like, for example, community-supported agriculture, where certain communities get together and they try to get food directly from their local farmers, because the local farmers are often struggling with getting their food into supermarkets. Oh, I also forgot to talk about supermarkets, which is also an important actor on the scene, because they really try to push on prices to be down, and which is forcing farmers to produce food in less sustainable ways. And so the community-supported agriculture just creates communities of people who get the food directly from the farmer. Then you have obviously farmers markets, but farmers markets in the Czech Republic have been a little bit problematic, because not all the people who sell on these markets are genuine local farmers. And then you have all kinds of gardening initiatives, like community gardens, but also allotment gardens, which are especially prevalent in Central and Eastern Europe. And people can produce quite a lot of food in these gardens, but also a lot of people in these countries, they have their own gardens, like behind their house. Mm. So that's not really traditionally considered as part of the food movement or the food transition movement, but it still contributes to, or at least it slows down a little bit the expansion of the global food system or the corporate regime.
Certainly,
there's like a place of resistance. And then there's also for example permaculture gardens, all kinds of organic farms, or there's also a term that is important, which is agroecology, which is basically a set of principles of doing agriculture in a socially and environmentally sustainable and just way. And a lot of these initiatives can basically adhere to these principles of agroecology.
I'm glad you would mention the garden allotment, because I was reading your article that is done with Dr. Plank. There's a statistic that I thought was very interesting, and maybe you could comment on it. I'll chop off a little bit of it and start where I found it interesting. But about 43% of the Czech population is involved in food self-provisioning, which in case of gardeners, contributes on average 33% of their vegetable, fruit, and potato consumption. For you, is that an impressive number, or it was interesting to me at least?
I hope we should maybe quote whose numbers these are, right? Because these are numbers of Professor Jehlička. And also Lucie Sobová has done some research that has basically confirmed the same thing. But also Jan Vávra has also been working on this. And I think, of course, it would be nice if it was even higher. But when you do international comparison, it is impressive. And this is actually one of the reasons why the East shouldn't be looked down on. Yeah, because it really depends on perspective. If you think that the highest form of development is not having to do anything and just being able to buy everything, being able to buy all of your food, being able to buy all the services you need, all you do is just go to your office, eat and watch TV, and you don't have to do anything, as opposed to people in the region of the so-called global East. Where a lot of people are they can be pretty self-sufficient in many ways, and not only by being able to produce their own food, or like if you go to a Czech countryside, you will still find people who are able to, who have their own pig or their own rabbits, their own chicken and stuff like that. But they can also do a lot of DIY stuff. They can build their own houses, fix their own houses. And this is something actually to be proud of, and not something that we should look down on. I still remember the moment when, I used to date this guy in London for quite a long time, for like almost 3 years. It was pretty serious, and my parents came to visit once, and the guy's parents were like, they needed to fix a lot of stuff in their house. The house was like falling apart a little bit in some ways, and my mom was like, "Oh, I could do a facade for your house." and then they also needed their rooms to be painted, and I was like, "Well, I'll paint the rooms for you." And they're like constantly surprised that we Easterners can do all these things by ourselves. And I actually can't do nowhere near as much as my mother and my father. Like my mom and my dad, they actually built their own house, and I'm still like amazed how many things the people who actually lived in communism can do on their own. Like they can build or fix basically anything. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of, I don't know, like we see the people in the West, and we're like jealous because they have these high wages and they can afford to pay for someone else to do it for them. But isn't it actually more cool that you can do it yourself?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a lost art. And for me personally, I'm not ashamed to admit I have like 4 brain cells when it comes to anything hands-on or types of blue-collar work. But yeah, my parents were just eons above me when it came to this practical homesteading type knowledge. But I think we are running low on time, so I would like to ask the last question. And is there anything you'd like to leave the viewers of the Bishkek Express podcast with, some valuable insights or something you would like to, some last words that you feel would be meaningful?
Well, I would say try to see in your own country what you're good at and what you can teach the rest of the world, and maybe think a little bit about the future, because the future is not going to be the way it is now or the way it is being presented to us as the only version of reality by the West or by, the capitalists, because find ways how your country can be more resilient and be prepared for very uncertain future, and try to build on that. And
uplifting and cautionary. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for appearing on this podcast today. We very much appreciate it. A special thanks to Karlin On Air for the amazing studio. I love the color scheme. And my best friend has helped me come up with a very cheesy outro, per se, to this podcast. So without further ado, you came here for the knowledge. We are Connect. Rahmat, spasiba, we're Bishkek Express. But in all seriousness, please like and subscribe, and there will be the addition of a Patreon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.